then we have other people who talk about how they haven't had any real feeling of actual pleasure since 2020. They haven't had a feeling of real lightness because of one or a million things that have happened to them. I got a lot of stories about people whose people died during COVID, from COVID, not just from COVID, but who couldn't go to funerals, who couldn't hug loved ones, to go through such an important ritual of saying goodbye to somebody who died because of all the limitations. It was so messed up. And so many people are still sitting with it because we are in this incessant, like, we must move forward to survive, mentality.
Hi there, grief growers. I am so grateful to be here with you as always. If you've been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. And if you are new to me in my work, hello. It's lovely to meet you. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach, two-time author, and founder of Life After Loss Academy, and I have helped thousands of grieving people stop feeling stuck, lost, broken, and alone in the aftermath of grief, and start building lives that they genuinely love from the lives loss forced them to live. This not only includes death and death-adjacent losses, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, and, as we'll discuss today, all the types of losses that came with living through a pandemic. Here on the show, we believe that grief is not something to get over. It is something to grow with and alongside, and that by treating grief less like a problem to be solved and more like an invitation to live more deeply in our human bodies and lives here on Earth, we can create meaningful lives that are rich with all of the memories that we carry, the weight of all the struggles that we faced, and the preciousness of what it means to be here on Earth right now in this moment. Today on the show, I had the joy of sitting down with Rebecca Soffer, who is one of the co-founders of Modern Loss, to talk about the 5-year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic. I cannot believe it's been 5 years either. We discussed why good leadership is vital in seasons of grief and crisis. We talked about some of our fantasy grief rituals that we would love to see on a larger scale for the world to honor COVID loss, and how to live inside what she refers to as the third wave of COVID, which is not another mutation of the virus, but the third wave meaning the lifetime effect of the grief of the pandemic. Here's a little bit about Rebecca. Rebecca Soffer is the co-founder of Modern Loss, which offers creative and candid content and community surrounding the long arc of grief. She is the best-selling author of the Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience, and her other book, Modern Loss, Candid Conversations About Grief, Beginners Welcome. Her work has been widely published, including in the New York Times, NBC Think, and Time magazine, and she speaks globally on loss and resilience. Rebecca is a Peabody Award-winning former producer for The Colbert Report and a Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism alumna. Rebecca, I am so excited to talk to you and just be in space with you again, because something that just happened is the 5th anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic, the beginning of COVID-19. And we live in a world where so much is happening all the time. As my wife says, all the time, all the time. It went so under-acknowledged, at least on my radar. And I'm a person who has lost somebody to COVID. And I know that so many people who I interact with, who are on my social media, who are coming across as clients and students, everybody is like, where is the acknowledgement that this was actually a big deal? And I've always seen you and your work in Modern Loss as like a beacon of COVID, like a holdout, almost like standing on this island being like, hey, we see you, this is important, it matters. It is the greatest loss event of our lifetime. And I would just love to speak on what it's like for people who do not feel honored or recognized as this 5-year milestone goes by, and also how people who are supporting people who've lost somebody to COVID can continue to support the friends and family in their midst and continue to treat it like it was something significant that happened, because it was.
It was hugely significant. And I think if you're somebody who doesn't think it notably changed your life in 152 different ways, then you're not paying attention. You know, I I know a lot of people who died from COVID. My best friend said goodbye to her mom in May of 2020 through an iPad because she was in the ICU. And then a couple months later, the same thing happened to her husband's mom. I am related to people who have long COVID,
Mm-hmm.
have had my own personal struggles with this terrible virus. And I think that so many people, like you say, in the modern loss community. So let me go back. For many years, I was working in this grief space and I was talking about how we have to talk about grief and how it doesn't have to be this like tiny little niche thing that we talk about just in therapy, that therapy hour or in like the religious circle or in the hushed tones by the water cooler, how it should also be really and mostly be something that we talk about out loud, out of the shadows, in a let it all hang out way, because we all go through it, right? And for many years, it was an uphill battle for me to convince the people who didn't get it yet why we need to talk about it and convince them why it's not a morbid or morose thing to
Yeah.
talk about, because I don't believe it is. I think it's very life affirming to talk about grief and loss. And then COVID hit. And I want to say that when I look back, I literally feel like it was from one day to the next that people viewed the work that both you and I do as less of a, niche experience and more of an, oh, I get it. This should be on CNN kind of conversation, because everybody understood suddenly what grief feels like, even if it wasn't through death loss. We all understood what it feels like suddenly to wake up and not understand what not just like next year might look like for you or next month, but what 4 o'clock might look like in your day. We were thrust into a grief space. We had our coping mechanisms, that many of which we had spent years building and honing and perfecting, ripped out from underneath us. And seemingly, at least in my recollection of things, which let's not go by that because I don't think my brain has worked since March 2020 correctly, the community of modern loss ballooned, because all of a sudden we had all of these people who not only were, yes, like moving across that long arc of loss. Maybe they had a loss 10 years ago, 20 years ago, last year, last month. But now we had all these people coming back to us who had free triggered losses, like they were having all these things come up as a
Sure.
result of the pandemic. And then we had all these new people who were like, what is grief? What is this loss thing? How do I move through it? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes, since the very beginning, I have been beating the drum of we are in a time of enormous grief and loss. And if we don't take something meaningful from this piece of crap experience that the world is being handed right now, tease some meaning out of it that hopefully might make us somewhat more empathetic toward each other, I don't know what we have left. Like this is our opportunity. Here we are 5 years later, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're in a country where a lot of COVID protections and restrictions have disappeared, have vanished, where a lot of people are going about life if they have COVID and they're like, okay, whatever, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to go to work, not really thinking about the fact that there are immunocompromised people out there who are absolutely terrified to commune with society when there are spikes in the illness because of what might happen to them. And we have just so many people who are wondering whether they're going insane because they themselves have had people die close to them, or they themselves are living with a long-term illness, which is
Mm-hmm.
now, long COVID, that we have so much left to discover about with regard to treatment and how it works. And they feel marginalized, they feel invisible, because our country and our world is very much set up for this think you next mindset. I think that, there's a certain amount of like kind of dialing down that we have to do in order to move through life, because life is very painful and we're taking a lot of painful things with us. But I also think that there's a real danger in not contending with real enormous grief that hasn't really been fully examined and respected and dissected 5 years in, mostly because we're still watching the dust settle around everything that has been lost, not just the people who have died, but the myriad ways in which our lives have been rattled and shaken and changed as a result of it all. And I give everybody credit. We do get the long tail. We deserved many years to start dealing with this, but I think we're not really doing it in the way in which we should. I think we can do a lot better to make people who are dealing with physical COVID death in their lives and just real COVID loss, do them the service of respecting and honoring those losses and making them feel seen in them. It's really
Yeah.
hard to move through something difficult unless you feel acknowledged in that thing.
Yeah, I was literally going to bring that up. You wrote a wonderful piece for NBC, and I can't believe I'm saying this. I think it was written in October of 2020, the first 6 months of the
Oh, yeah.
pandemic. And you have this lovely quote that says, "There's no healing until grief is processed, and it cannot be processed until it is acknowledged." And you literally almost just said that word for word. And I kind of want to sink into some fantasy space for a second, because I feel
Ooh,
like this is an element of grief that
yes,
we don't
please.
often do. But in this
Please,
article, yeah,
Calgon,
right.
take me away from all of this.
Take me away. But in this piece, something I loved is that you were already dreaming of putting together something like a Million Mourners March, or some sort of uh, national or global acknowledgement of the losses from COVID. And as of the 5th anniversary of COVID, we've now lost 7 million people worldwide to this virus. And that's just what gets reported to the World Health Organization. So chances are the toll is higher. So I think if we could put you in a time machine, and I'll invite listeners to answer this question as well, and go back to 2020 when this was first starting, and then also come back to the present and sit here in the now. What if you had infinite power in the world and you knew people would go along with it? What would you have done to acknowledge the grief that's coming up in the world, and what like fantasy world would you create now? I hate saying it's a fantasy world, but what fantasy world would you create now to acknowledge and honor all the grievers that even more so are feeling unseen and unheard today?
That's a great question, Shelby. And I want to think about it, and I'm going to answer, I think, in two parts.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bigger part is going to be the second part of your question, which is like, what would I, if I could Franken design a fantasy reality in which we're living right now? I think part of that reality, on the one hand, is coming true. And I say that in a way that is hopeful and optimistic, because I can't deal with like zero. Well, I can deal with zero optimism. I don't have a lot of it right now, but I do have hope. I always have hope because I can't move forward without that. Um, on the one hand, we are seeing a lot of things coming to light. We are finally starting to see COVID folded and woven through narratives in artistic expression. And I think that it took years for that to happen with many people. And I'll give you an example. Rachel Bloom, who my crazy ex-girlfriend. I'm always aware it's not my crazy ex-girlfriend, it's crazy ex-girlfriend. She had this musical comedy show on the CW, and she's so funny and so wonderful. And her writing partner, Adam Schlesinger, who was one of the guys from Fountains of Wayne, this hugely talented songwriter, he died from COVID in, I think, late March 2020, at the latest early April 2020. And it was when her own newborn daughter was in the NICU after being born. And talk about an absolute mindfuck that required time to, I guess, reflect upon before trying to make sense of any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And she has this wonderful show that I've now seen live twice called Death Let Me Do My Special. And it's all about her going there and how she spent so long trying not to go there. And their only other character in the the performance is Death, the actual character of Death. And he's like,
Wow.
why don't you tell me the hard thing that happened in March 2020? And she's like, oh my God, totally. Like I had this special and I was really scared that it wasn't going to go on because there was a pandemic. And he's like, go deeper. And then, pushes. And she's like, well, I had this baby and she was in the NICU and that was really scary. He's like, cool. Go deeper. And he finally gets her to get to the nut of it all, which is that her friend died from COVID v1.0. And it was an insane time. And she talks about it and she goes there and she talks about, the things that I talk about all the time, which is like, how can you move forward or find meaning from anything really hard unless you sit with it for a while?
Mm-hmm.
How can you release some of that pain and anger and confusion unless you really sit with it? There's really no way to do it. And so that's just an example of one of the things that I am seeing that is, people who are putting things out there. There are albums out there. There are a lot more, specials out there. Mark Maron has something on HBO, From Bleak to Dark, which is like one of my favorite specials. And he talks about losing his partner during COVID, during a pandemic, not from COVID. So you're going to see a lot more of that coming down the pike. And that's like my hopeful thing, because I think that really people were frozen for literal years into trying to figure out how to process this.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I did a survey of modern loss readers, and we have readers all over the world. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands. And I put it out there a month ago and I said, listen, I want to know how COVID has changed your existence 5 years on. And it's going to be unattributed. I'm not going to use your name. Be honest. And I cried when I read the responses, because so many people are still mentally in that moment of deep pandemic lockdown and lifestyle, and they haven't been given a chance to share those stories with someone who really wants to hear them.
Yeah.
There's a woman who talked about how she gave birth during that time and how it was the most screwed up birth experience that she could ever imagine, because she had to do it alone. Her husband wasn't allowed in the room with her. There was very limited visiting hours. Her mom couldn't meet the baby for more than a year, and how that's just sitting inside of her, and talked about all the isolation that she felt as a new mom stuck at home with no one to hold the baby, help her, give her a break, that X factor, someone in the room. And that is just one of the hundreds of examples that I had sent my way. Of course, then we have other people who talk about how they haven't had any real feeling of actual pleasure since 2020. They haven't had a feeling of real lightness because of one or a million things that have happened to them. I got a lot of stories about people whose people died during COVID, from COVID, not just from COVID, but who couldn't go to funerals, who couldn't hug loved ones, to go through such an important ritual of saying goodbye to somebody who died because of all the limitations. It was so messed up. And so many people are still sitting with it because we are in this incessant, like, we must move forward to survive, mentality. If I could Franken design a reality that was present day, it would be a reality in which we have designated a national day of mourning for COVID victims. And not just like a national day of mourning, but, for people who died, but really like for grief, for COVID grief, for the pandemic, and made it open to, if it feels like grief to you, it is people. And what I wish for a national COVID day of remembrance is maybe a way to honor not just our people or our pets or our own losses, but to have some sort of tradition where we do something that really feeds that need for nourishment that we're living with in our own ways as a result of the pandemic. Like, did you have to move because of the pandemic? Guess what? Fun fact, I've moved twice. Wasn't in my plans. I've moved twice, partially thanks to COVID. Um, and I miss a lot of like my former community. Is it a day where I try to reconnect with that community? You know, is it a day where did you have a parent who died from COVID? Like, is it a day where you really honor what you lost with them? You reconnect with their memory or their people who maybe are no longer in your life. You know, is it just something where you missed the sense of touch for so long that
Yeah.
you just have a big party because that is how you are creating ritual around something that you lost that has affected you so deeply. Just, you know, DIY ritual here. But I think that we have to carve out a day in which we have kind of an invitation and really maybe a mandate to do it. And I really don't think there should be work on that day.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't think it should be on a Sunday. Um, I don't think it should be on August 30th, like Grief Awareness Day. I don't really understand why it's, you know, on a day when really nobody is like really physically or mentally available. But you know, in my mind, it's, you know, early March, and that's or early to mid March, and that's when it happens. Um, Additionally, I wish that we were in a world where places of employment have now adopted bereavement policies
Hmm.
that really recognize the real grief that people live with, where, you know, something meaningful that has come out of this awful time of years long layers of grief, that people have a guaranteed 5 days of paid leave from a job if they have a loss. Um, and maybe they can take them in non-consecutive ways, that they're promised that they're not going to lose their job if they have to take some time off, that we, you know, have cut each other a break a little bit more and don't ask for, say, a death certificate to prove that there was a loss in the
Yeah, or a
workplace,
funeral
or a
pamphlet or
funeral.
whatever the heck. Yeah.
That, you know, that we ideally honestly haven't gone back to a mandated in office work situation, which so many places have gone back to. Um, you know, even though we've proven that we can be quite effective being flexible, you know, in flexible geographic situations, because a lot of people are still dealing with the added layers of identity and responsibility that they've had to take on as a result of the pandemic. Um, you know, they've moved to be closer to family members for that support, or to support family members who are ill, who they're caretaking. You know, like, I wish that we were in a world where we had more permanent flexibility and more cutting a break of to people, in addition to the formal uh, recognitions like national days of mourning. Um, and you know, I wish we were there. Um, and many of us are there. Many of us, I think, I'm not talking about me, I'm just talking about a lot of people I've met, have become really deeply much more empathetic over the last several years. There are a lot of incredible human beings out there who are helping people, even if it's just by showing up for one person who needs
Hmm.
them in a deeper way, because they have a better, deeper understanding of what grief is as a result of COVID. But if you look at the headlines, it's a real freaking bummer. You know,
Yeah.
you can't get free COVID tests anymore through the mail. They got rid of the long COVID, you know, research project, which maybe in some ways sure was not being effective, who knows, but in other ways, I don't know, shouldn't there be a lot of funds going towards something that probably, I don't know, billions of people around the world are suffering from right now?
Hmm.
um, we are just, you know, not honor we're not honoring it in the way in which we should be.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is like how you have opinions on this and I have opinions on this, but like something you wrote about in your article in 2020 was how important it is for leaders to demonstrate that grief is important. And when they don't, what they relay is a message of your grief doesn't matter, buck up and get over it. It's not so bad, at least, at least. And if you don't fall in line with that, or that doesn't line up with your experience of reality, is there's almost this, like, especially surrounding COVID-19, there's this gaslighting of it's not so bad. I don't understand why it's such a big deal for you. And so I'm hoping you can kind of, again, to do a kind of two-pronged approach of like acknowledging and validating, like, it was that bad and it continues to be that bad. And also speak a little bit on the importance of leaders. I'm talking our president in the United States, but also world leaders in acknowledging the weight of grief at large, COVID, war, pandemic, just on a large, large scale.
Can you just repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, just acknowledging to grieving people that it is as bad as you think it is, despite what a leader might be telling you about what's happening.
I don't love using the term gaslight because I think it's like a hashtag, just like hashtag trauma, like, oh, he didn't call me back.
we've
I'm hashtag traumatized.
we've taken therapy lingo into real life.
But like, yeah, I think there are certain situations in which you can gaslight someone. And I think it's like, we talk about it in the grief space all the time, which is when you use, say, toxic positivity, like, oh, come on, like it's not all that bad, or like, look on these bright sides, or at least it's not this, like, at least, right? Like anything that starts with at least is never going in a good direction for somebody. That's you trying to make yourself feel comfortable, not the person who you're trying to supposedly comfort or be there for. Things like, yeah, minimizing a virus and all the tentacles that come out of it, that are endless, really, that affect every aspect of somebody's life, and can, to just like not acknowledge that, like, while that may not have happened to you, you're aware that that is happening to the other person. And while you may not understand that firsthand, you care enough to try to. To me, that's the mark of a good leader. I mean, because I don't think any of us know everything. I mean, please show me someone who does. And, even in modern loss, when I'm writing, I always say, look, I only know my own personal experience. And that's why modern loss is a community endeavor. It's for people to share with each other. I'm not like the figurehead here. I'm just like the person who's kind of like leading it and setting the tone and like trying, like sharing the content. I think that a real mark of a good leader is someone who doesn't try to belittle people for struggling in something very real, make them think that they're not strong enough, they're not doing it right. For me, that's just really an extension of like everything that I always say about loss, which is, when you have this metaphor that I hate, right, which is like, I talk about it in my newer book, The Modern Loss Handbook, which is like, we have this way of talking about grief and hard things, which is, we approach it from this like warrior metaphor, like it's a battle that has to be won and that you're going to vanquish it. Like she had cancer and she fought really hard and she lost the battle. I mean, did she, or did she just like die from cancer? Because cancer is just really fucking awful and doesn't care who it kills and doesn't decide who it's going to kill. Does that mean that she didn't care to live as much as the person who is in remission? It doesn't. Now, some of these metaphors may not bother everyone, and that's totally fine. I don't care. I'm just talking about how it sits with me and a lot of people who I talk to, because a lot of people do walk around feeling less than, or like they're not doing it right, because they're not doing it in the way that society tells us that we should do it. They're not vanquishing the aggressor, which is in this conversation, grief. Well, there's no vaccine for grief. It's something that you just have to wake up and do and screw up, or maybe do a little better and go to sleep and wake up and do it again. And that is the way that it goes. And so leaders, if they can't acknowledge that grief is folded into the, not only the human experience, but the life experience of anything that really lives, then I don't know. I don't really look up to that very much. I think you have a lot of people who feel really invisible even if you're someone who likes a lot of what that leader stands for. You know, grief is not political. It's just not. I mean, sometimes I get DMs saying like, "Why you got to make it political?" And I'm like, "I'm literally not. I'm actually not. I'm not making it political." If you hear me talking about how I would like to have gun reform, that's because I believe in preventing unnecessary grief from traumatic gun violence, because I've met enough families whose lives are never going to be anything remotely close to okay, according to them, because of it. So yeah, I'm not making it political. This is a very human subject. It's not Republican, Democrat, or even libertarian. And I wish,
Yeah.
it's I think it's other people who are making it political.
Yeah. I love you just said something in one way that I say in the exact opposite way, because I tell people grief is political, but it's not partisan. And so I think politics and grief, everybody has politics, whether you participate in the political machine or not is up to you.
Really fair enough.
And grief happens to everybody, whether you participate actively in the experience of grieving or not. And how you vote and what you do in your community determines what types of griefs you will and will not face in some part. There are things you cannot possibly predict coming, even though people predicted things like COVID coming, that are influenced by what you do politically. And so I think saying a similar thing but entirely a different way, grief is not political and that it belongs to everyone, and grief is totally political and that it belongs to everyone.
Yes,
Yes.
you are totally right. Copy, print. Yes,
Yeah, literally
that.
just that whole section
Trademark
right there.
it, Shelby. Yeah, totally. I mean, you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's tough times, and the range of loss out there is so deep, and it's just this real humbling moment when you realize that hundreds of people are willing to lay bare their true, raw, candid experiences with something really hard to you, that they feel comfortable enough with you that you're not going to sensationalize their stories, or you're not going to share their names. They trust you with those stories. And I I don't take that lightly. I take it very seriously that people trust me with those stories. And I do wish that everyone who was grieving had some feeling like that from somebody in their lives. And I do wish, in my fantasy world, that they felt like that in their society, about their society at large.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're just not there.
We're not there. And I think that leads perfectly into my last question. Then we'll talk about how people can connect with modern loss, because it is such an outpost for support, even for me. I've been following along for so many years. But something that you wrote about in 2020, I keep going back to this article because I feel like, wow, what a piece of journalism to come out in the first 6 months and then to kind of predict the flow of how everything was going to unfold. At the time, we were in a second wave of the virus. So people talked about the first wave and then they talked about the second wave. And you're like, the third wave is going to be grief. We don't know when it will hit. We don't know when it will come. But the kind of aftermath reckoning we will have with this virus is not another mutation of the virus. It will be the grief that we have as a result
the next
of
pandemic.
This virus.
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So my last question for you is like, if people are in a place where they now notice, whether because of this show or because of their own awareness of their lives, I am sitting in this third wave. I am now in the grief of everything that happened. Mm-hmm. What the hell do I do next? Or what do I do with this? Or how do I cope with this? And how do I keep going? Because the world keeps going and it sucks. And we're all part of this world rude, that's keeping going.
It's just so rude.
So it's just like, take us through best practices for third wave, because I think that's something we're all inside of.
I mean, third wave of this is, if it, as you say, if you've realized, if it's slamming into you that what you're really dealing with is grief, then first of all, congratulations. I say that's a really good thing, to try to, kind of flip the script a little bit, instead of like, oh my God, this is grief, like I am destroyed. No, more like, commend yourself for coming to this realization, because that's a
Yeah.
really powerful thing to do for yourself. Like, that's a milestone. I can't even tell you how long it took me to get the right support for myself after my mom was killed in a car accident. I mean, years, actual years to build my team, which were not all like clinicians. A lot of them were just like people in the world, you know?
Good humans. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, good humans. And so if you're laid bare with all this stuff and you're like, this is grief and it's because of this, that, it's because of my burnout, it's because of my dead cousin, you know, or my professor who died, you know, from COVID, or the miscarriage I had during the pandemic, or the fact that I had to become an online kindergarten teacher and work full time as an attorney on Zoom for a year, you know, this is all grief, you know, so congratulations, you're realizing it. And then what are you going to do with it is the next question. Like, you have a choice now, which is, are you going to figure out how to respect and acknowledge and examine this grief, or are you not? And I highly suggest option A, because if you do, then you contend with it and you figure out what parts of it are the real triggers for you. Because there are triggers, like there are in life. Everything is a trigger, a potential trigger. You know, you could be going about the day and maybe have some sort of meeting that reminds you of a meeting that you were having in deep COVID, or,
Hmm.
you know, just reach for the bottle of syrup in the grocery store and be taken back to another hard moment when maybe you were ordering from Instacart for 3 months because you couldn't go to a grocery store and you were overwhelmed, right? So you have to figure out, like, how are you going to acknowledge this? How are you going to examine it? And what help are you going to get? And I always recommend, as somebody who is not a licensed professional mental health worker, um, get some professional help, you know, do it. You know, that one of the things that I think is a huge upside of the pandemic. It's almost weird because a lot of the virtual stuff has kind of retreated, but online therapy is still very readily available. You can still very readily do grief sessions on Zoom, on the phone, whatnot. So if you can't get to
Hmm.
someone in person, there are ways. There really are. Get it for yourself. I think that a grief counselor, or, you know, if you feel like, you know, if they can probably correctly ascertain whether you're dealing with trauma as well, and potentially refer you to a trauma specialist. Maybe on top of it, you would like some cognitive behavioral therapy to help with behavioral things that are coming up, so that you can, you know, rework how you try and react to things when they come up. But that's like using your agency to help
Yeah.
yourself. And it's getting a sounding board that doesn't have any judgment attached to it. And that's the beauty of getting some real counseling that works, right? It's somebody who isn't coming to the table with any biases or any other like shared memories, like a sibling when you're talking about a mom,
Yeah.
and
Or a
like they have
roommate or
different
yeah.
memories, and or a roommate, and you're talking about a friend. Just go get someone who doesn't give a crap and just gives a crap about helping you, you know?
Yes.
But beyond
Yes.
that, it's in really figuring out how to level up for yourself, figuring out where your greatest needs are. Are you struggling at work? Then figure out how to help yourself at work. Figure out what the ideal situation is for you in your professional life, and try and figure out if you can ask for it. And no one gets everything they ask for, but a lot of people get some of it. So is it that you might need a more flexible work schedule, or maybe there are productivity hours that are better for you that have shifted from what your productivity hours used to be? Or is it that maybe you'd like to request some time off? And yeah, it'll be unpaid. You have to deal with it. That sucks. But isn't unpaid time off with a guaranteed job better than maybe no job? So maybe there's a way to work with, if you are at a company that has HR. Many people don't have that. Many people are self-employed or at smaller companies, or not even working at all. But is there a way to just kind of ask, say, I want to stay here, you know, I
Hmm.
want to work here. Is there a way that we can do it? You know, that can happen with like me feeling like my needs are being met so that I can really show up fully. I think that you really would be surprised by how flexible companies are willing to be with people, but
Yeah.
they are waiting for people to go to them with it. And
Hmm.
that's not fair. Onus shouldn't be on you, but it is. Now, of course, in the rest of your life, which is your social world, you still probably have to date and probably have to be a partner or probably just have to be happily single or be a parent, be with your friends. What do you need from them? Think about it. Do you need friends to support you and show up for you in ways in which they are not? Do they know that? So, first, cut them a break and assume that no one can perfectly intuit what it is that you need. And we have to do that because I don't want you to cut off your friendships. I don't. If they're toxic ones, I want you to cut them off. But most friendships are not. Most friendships, people I think generally want to show up for somebody, but they don't exactly know how. And they are waiting for some sort of direction. So, are you having a really hard time? Are you really having a hard time right now? Who is it in your life? Who are the friends who can take having a real earnest, tough conversation? Go to those first. Give them the chance to show up for you in return, and then go from there, while knowing that not everyone is going to be able to hang with all of your hard things. And that's not necessarily a personal reflection of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that everyone, look at what we're talking about. Everyone is going through an overwhelming time right now. So you might have people who just might be able to show up for you in ways within their capacities at any given moment. But try and think about the fact that still means that they're showing up for you. Like, I'm really just like, I'm a friend fan. I don't go around telling people to tell their friends to screw off because they forgot their mom's death anniversary. I do encourage people to give people a chance. And
Hmm.
you'll know when they're really not repeatedly coming through for you, and then you'll act. But, it really is up to us to ask for things. It sucks. It's not fair.
Yeah.
But look at the world right now. Is there anything that looks fair?
Well, not only that, but I think we are trying so hard as people to simply make it through another day that for as much as we love our friends, for as much as we love our families, for as much as some of us even love our jobs, our top priority for the most part is what's in front of us right now. And unless
Right.
there's a notification or a reminder or an email
Yeah.
or a nudge from a friend or a hey on the street, it's not what I'm dealing with in this moment. And for as much as I can be a good grief friend, I can also be a really bad one. And so sometimes just having reminders, even on my calendar, of like this person's thing's coming up. And so remember, and if I'm 2 days late, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I forgot whoever's date, sending you some love and care. Let's hang
Yep.
out next weekend. Um,
I'm a big
Acknowledging everybody's
calendar.
trying their
I'm a
best.
big scheduler.
Yeah.
It is how I remember everyone. It's how I remember everyone's birthdays. I have a list of people who I know, consider Mother's Day, season to be a huge trigger. And I specifically reach out to them 2 weeks in advance. That's just what I do, and guess what? It takes me a total of like 7 to 10 minutes.
Hmm.
Because everyone knows no one has time for a phone call anymore. And if you can have that, that's amazing. Ask for it. Someone will give it to you. But I don't have time to reach out with a phone call. I just start reaching out with a text. Hey, ugh, how obnoxious. Mother's Day is happening again.
It's garbage. Yeah.
How you doing? And that's what most people just need, which is like just, knowing that someone else sees something coming down the pike just like they do.
Hmm.
And a tacit acknowledgement that could be hard. And do you need anything? It
Yes.
goes so far. I mean, it just goes back to what I always say, which is like, we just need to feel seen. I mean, it's really, really hard to feel like you can be compassionate towards others if you're stewing in not having received compassion yourself.
Yeah. It just I mean, put simply, it just helps to know that somebody gives a crap about you and what happens to you
Yes,
and what
I
you've been
think that is
through.
in the Bible.
And I I hope it's in the Bible. I hope it's in
It's in
something.
Leviticus. I don't know. I actually don't, I don't even know that I'm Jewish, and I'm always like, I literally don't know any of the books, as it were. So
You're like, it's in the
I always say
Bible.
Leviticus
Absolutely.
because
Sure.
I know that one. Yeah.
I love it. On the note of Mother's Day, I want to close out our conversation by giving you like 2 minutes to talk about the Mother's Day gift swap, which is coming up, which is run by Modern Loss every year. And then also, you just got named, I think, a bestseller or a most popular or most amazing on Substack as a newsletter for grieving people. So please talk about where people can find both of those things. And I'll tell you, if you're
Yeah.
signing up for the Mother's Day swap, you could get me as your
Ooh, oh
partner.
my
This is my
God, you
first year joining.
could.
I'm very excited. I'm
Oh, I'm
finally
very
available to
excited.
do it.
Oh,
And so
I
I'm
heard it
really
here
excited to
first.
be a
That's
part
so
of it.
fun. I'm so excited. I can't wait to match you. Yeah, so in 2017, I had a newborn. Literally, I had a 2-week-old baby. And I was like, just sitting and nursing all the time. And then I was doing edits on my book. And I was like, oh, Mother's Day is coming up in a month. Like, that sucks.
Yep.
Because I was
Yep.
in newborn mom phase. And I'm like, that just sucks because I already had another kid. And I was like, wow, it still sucks. Like I have the dead mom, and now I have these 2 beautiful kids. And you would think that the kids would have replaced the pain from the mom and the Mother's Day. No, no, no. It actually makes it
Mm,
weirder and harder
hmm
in many ways. And it makes it better in some ways. And then it makes it harder in other ways. It's just like, it's all a mixed bag. Right. And so I'm like, I'm on my like X number of year as someone living with loss right now, with mother loss, with father loss. And I kind of want to like take back this stupid holiday that is, you know, screwing with my mind every year. And I want to kind of create a ritual so that anything left over, I can do whatever I want with my time. Like if I feel like I have done something that kind of honors not like really my mom's memory, right? Because I always honor my mom's memory. And I don't
Yeah.
need to just like spend Mother's Day having brunch as though I were having brunch with my mom. And I love her. And I know that she would be like, just please don't have brunch. Brunch is not my favorite meal and anyway. But it's not a really, for me, it's not really about like her. It's kind of selfish. It's about reframing it and taking it back for me because I'm
Yeah.
still around. And also, I just also happen to be a mother. And I don't want to spend the whole day in this like days of like, God, it sucks, man. So, what if I created this ritual where people had this opportunity to feel like they were connecting with their feelings, with their loss, with whatever they needed, the living people left behind, needed to connect with. And then they could do whatever else they wanted on that day because they already had something where they knew they were going to feel seen. And so I sent out this form and I was like, do you hate Mother's Day for any reason? Let's do a Mother's Day modern loss gift swap. And I'm going to match you with somebody else who dreads this day for any reason. It's modern loss, so maybe normally loss related. And I want you to send a card and send a gift to that person. They're going to do the same. And
hmm
let me just play matchmaker. And like hundreds of people signed up to my absolute terror because I was like, oh, now I have to match all these people and whatever. And it was so crazy and it worked. And people all around the country sent presents to each other and they are still in touch and all this stuff. And now we're 9 years later and I'm still doing it. And so just today I put up the sign up form for the 9th annual Modern Loss Mother's Day gift swap. And I do it for Father's Day and I do it for the winter holidays. And it's, is this a sucky day for you? So why don't you just get the opportunity to be paired with somebody else who feels the same way, maybe for different specific reasons, right? Different details, but it's all the same. This is a trigger holiday for us. So I want you to do something awesome for someone based on their likes and their hobbies and all this. Send them a gift that like you think they'd actually like. Write them a card so that they get a card, but also I want you to take back the feeling of being able to send something to somebody or do something for someone around this day.
Yeah.
If that was taken away from you, or if you never got to have it in the first place.
hmm
So I just put the form up. The form sign up form is open, I think, through the end of Sunday. And I'm really excited to see what happens. It is, as I was telling you before we got on the call, I make zero money from this. I have to charge some sort of administrative fee because like we literally spend like a long time working on this and pairing people. Like people are literally paired based on like, oh, like two people lost their moms to COVID. That might be
Yeah.
nice for them to connect. It's not just like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, two people who are 30, let's connect them. And it really is a beautiful, beautiful, wacky, crazy, awesome experiment. And the reason I think it is important now is because a lot of places that are institutions that you would think would be coming through for you are actually not. It is really falling on us to do it, to catch those people who
Yeah.
are otherwise maybe not going to be caught by the institutions that should catch them. So,
Yeah.
I do encourage everyone to give it a whirl, and we'll be doing one for Father's Day. And yes, I do have a Substack, which I've been writing for years. I think I'm like probably an OG Substacker because it was originally on MailChimp, and I've been doing modern loss, work since 2013. So it's been a long time. And I got an email last week saying, congratulations, your number of whatever, like 60, what, I don't know, like 63 in the wellness and health category in Substack. I think that there are like hundreds and hundreds of wellness and health Substacks, and
And
that's
grief
kind of
cracked the
neat.
top 100.
Like that's cool. That's nice because that is something that I run for me, and if it helps the reader, like I want it to help the reader, but that is like the one thing that I reserve for just me. I don't publish my own articles on modernloss.com because it's not about me. The Substack is like, it's really my personality and what I think is interesting and what I'm thinking about and what I think might be interesting to you or help you out. And so that's really meaningful. And if if you subscribe, that's awesome. And if you pay subscribe, that's even more awesome because it's certainly less than a third of what a rack rate therapy session could cost, one single therapy session for an entire year subscription for context. And, we do weekly Zooms and, there's a lot of connectivity points along the way. It's just, I think, a nice additive for people.
Yeah, and not everybody, we talk about this a lot in the work that I do, like therapy is incredible, and also people recommend therapy as like your first little handout when you're grieving is like, here's your advice, you should see someone, blah, 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 you should talk to somebody. And I tell you, I have seen therapists through the years, and I just restarted therapy again last Friday, thank goodness. But also things that are supplemental to therapy or more conversational or more personal stories where it feels like I'm hearing from people who've had similar experiences, or
Absolutely.
they say things that are funny. They're willing to swear. They're willing to talk
Yeah. Oh
about
my
politics
God.
and COVID
Totally.
and
Look,
all this other
again,
stuff.
I think it's
So
like
helpful.
therapy's great. Like literally, I will never say otherwise. It's great.
Hmm.
I probably have hundreds to probably more than it might be even in the thousands of therapists who are subscribers to
Yes.
to modern loss because A, they need an outlet, and B, it's really great for them because they get ideas, for their clients where they have to leave off. I mean, I provide resources and stuff like you say, like, I mean, therapy can only last so long in your daily life, maybe an hour a week, maybe 2 hours a week. The rest of it is community. And you got to find community in real life, virtually, or in your head, even just through your own creativity. You can find community just by writing an article yourself. And so modern loss really is, it's a community and it's a movement. It is a movement meant to destigmatize the experience of grief and loss in whatever way that means, resonates for you. And to help connect people through it all and really across the long arc of it, not
Yeah.
just
I
like
was
my
just
dad
going to
died
say, I was
today,
like, normalize the
really
fact
at
that it
any
keeps
given
going.
moment. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on Grief Grower today. I am so, so glad to talk to you and just honor this milestone for what it is, but also for what it will continue to be moving forward into the future. And I always just love introducing you to people. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for your work. You're amazing. I can't wait to see who gets you in the gift swap.
I'm so excited to join, and I'll post about it on Instagram so people follow along and
Thank
see
you.
who we get paired with.
Thanks for
Cool.
inviting me, and thanks for inviting me to be your inaugural guest. That is a real treat.
That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so very much for joining me today. If you're looking for grief support beyond the show, you can find free workshops, blog articles, and my signature What's Your Grief Support Style quiz at shelbyforsythia.com/links. If this podcast felt validating, comforting, educational, or helpful to you in any other way, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend, because you never know what somebody you love is going through. A huge thank you to the Grief Growers community on Patreon for supporting the show. If you'd like to join them and help me keep this show free from ads, because grief is hard enough without commercials for meal kits and mattresses, head to patreon.com/shelbyforsythia, and you can find that link in the show notes. Grief Grower is hosted by yours truly, Shelby Forsythia, and the theme music is composed by Addie Goldstein. Until next time, I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.